Hi, I'm Danger Dan Jers, the host and GM of the D&D Real Play podcast, D&D Dark. Join us on Wednesdays for an absurd, over-the-top comedy horror adventure, starring some of history's most infamous monsters.
I'm Ben Magnet. I play Mary Frankenstein, our barbarian.
I am Daniel Cruz. I am playing Imhotep the Mummy, our cleric.
I'm Jordan, and I play Larry Talbot, a lycanthropic warlock.
I am Grayson, playing Jet Griffin, the Invisible Man, the party's rogue.
I am Aaron. I play the Phantom of the Opera, our bard.
For more information, go to dndarkpodcast.com and listen to us anywhere you find podcasts.
Listen up, nerds. We're doing pen and paper stuff. The Paladins of Podcast are back. And rolling the dice on new content, upgrades to nothing, and a few missing pages from the rule books. Introducing Joshua Johnson, the man behind... Wait, where did those notes go? Follow Rob and Josh as they navigate the Outer Planes and anywhere in between on the Epic Table Games audio show.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Epic Table Games audio show with your Paladins of Podcast, Rob and Josh. Hey, Josh, how are you doing?
Doing pretty well, especially from our show last week. I really enjoyed doing that with you. I felt like our conversation went really well. I felt like we well engaged with our conversation topics. And I felt like we could easily be passionate about how we felt about how the corporation Wizards of the Coast was handling things and how Hasbro kind of intersected with them.
Yeah, we did. We covered a lot of that. And it was fun. I really dig it. And I think a few of the things that we touched on last week are things that I would like to be able to continue today. And especially because you're new to our audio show, our listeners don't have some of the greatest background with you personally. So I'd like them to kind of hear a little bit about general inspiration. I know I've talked about it before on some of the shows, but we've talked about your history and how long you've been in the tabletop RPG community, where your experience comes from, but where do you pull that inspiration from is something that I'd like to be able to talk about.
Okay, so I have what I'm going to call the experience that a lot of people like me, especially in the last few years, have really engaged with when it comes to especially Dungeons and Dragons. I have heard about it for a long time when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. I think the first time I heard about it was in middle school, just vaguely floating in the background. The term was said, and I only had the lightest tone of what it might mean, but other than that, complete unknown. And this is where, like, you would see in, like, comedy shows, LARPing and things like that.
Oh, God.
And, I'm seeing this stereotype, and I'm like, that looks so fun. What is that? And I was in nerd culture in my era in year, if you watch anime, you're in the losers club. Like, pretty much. Total degenerate, like, ostracized. So obviously, that's not the open-minded society, more open-minded society that we lean in towards now. Right. So I just went a long time without being involved with that. So I would say about 2015, 2016, that is where it got a hold of me, and I was like, I never tried this before. It looks so interesting, and I actually have friends. Like, I want to see what this is about. And a couple of my friends, when I brought it up to them, were in the exact same zone I was. They didn't know exactly what it was, and we wanted to look into it. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, my close personal friend, Tyler, his now wife, and her brother all got together. We got one player's handbook, and we went through the nightmare fuel that is a lot of people trying to set up their character.
Oh, God, that's... I would have to say that nightmare fuel is the perfect way to say that, especially if you're just jumping into Dungeons and Dragons specifically, primarily because it is like stereo instructions to read through, and it is obnoxious, it's boring, there are a lot of rules, there's a lot of math involved. Whether you're starting out at level 1 or level 10 or 20, it doesn't matter. So the fact that you guys made it through without guidance.
It's not even a good way to describe it, genuinely. So what I'll describe to you for what happens to a lot of people, if you play without recommendations or looking online, let me describe your first session to you. You and your friends will get character sheets, and you will spend 4 to 6 hours creating one set of characters. They will be set up wrong, and you don't even know how to play. So it's even rougher. So, for example, my friend's wife's brother started trying to run the game, and it went really bad. It also didn't help that he was like still in high school, I believe, or end of high school. So he was very into meme culture, and at the time he started just referencing Cannibal Shia LaBeouf.
That's funny.
And it was funny the first time he made the joke. The 5th time he made the joke, it was pretty boring and dumb.
That's fair.
And then immediately leaning into like the wife was just, oh yeah, we come across an old man in the street. She's like, I trip him, and we're like, all right, what is this like? And that's how people are when they start playing.
Yeah, it's one of those instances where when you are new to the game and you're just jumping in, I find that there is either option paralysis, there's too much to do that you just don't know what to do, or you act out character-wise in a way that is not generally societally acceptable.
Yeah, because now you can be a bully in the game. You have more power than you have in real life, and so therefore you're gonna do it.
Why not? It's one of those things. Learning how to play the game properly, not even just in the case of, let's say, tripping the old guy. And it's not like that's a wrong way to play. It's just learning to play the game properly comes down to knowing how to handle that situation. And when you have a group of friends learning together, it is a lot of learning curve to that.
Yeah, there was no nothing. We had nothing to work off of. We didn't know what a module was. We really didn't know anything. We just kind of did our best. It was incredibly fun. I will say that. If you start that way with your friends, you will have a good time.
Yeah.
It's just very jarring, and I can see it turning away people when they do what we did. And actually, the vast majority of new players will do exactly that. They'll go, I want to essentially do what will be called homebrew, because they just don't realize it at the time.
Right.
And they will try to homebrew the crap out of their character and build them from scratch. My actual immediate suggestion is run a module, like a very simple one, and use the pre-mades. I know it's not. It's not. I know it's like frustrating because people want to immediately engage. But when you start with a pre-made, you realize you can build any personality onto them that you want, and they're already set up. So you can just play the same day that you're starting.
And that's a great way to really start. And I remember when I got started, I had started with a more experienced dungeon master, so they kind of helped me get everything set up and on the way. And I mean, the internet was around, but finding nerd stuff, it wasn't as expansive as it is today. So,
would you say they inducted you into the cult?
I don't know. And I have to say I don't know, and this is funny. I had a good friend. He and I have been friends as of today for close to 25 plus years. And he was into the culture before I was. Years before I was. He would inject this nerd culture into everyday conversations, and it would be so over the top I just wouldn't get it. I thought it was ridiculous. So I fought it for like a long time because it was just too much.
What year was this? That I have to know.
When I first started resisting, or when I finally said, fuck it, I'll give it a try?
When you heard it right away, resisting.
Oh man, 1998.
And how old were you?
Oh God. It was just before high school. I was middle school, late middle school, 7th, 8th grade.
I see why you're resistant, because that's when the culture is like, this is where you see all the nerds sitting at one table, and that's it, and like everyone else looks at them like they're losers.
I didn't have that. So, I mean, to give a little bit of background, when I was in 7th grade, that's when my musical tastes had shifted from like top 40 what's on the radio to metal, rock. In fact, the first, I don't even want to say metal because I don't classify it as metal, but it's when I went from my top 40, listened to All in the Family by Korn, and that got me hooked and switched from musical genre to musical genre. Yo-yos were incredibly popular. Hacky sack was incredibly popular, and I was a part of the group of friends who played that. We didn't really have a nerd group, but I was friends with nerd groups too. Comic books, movies, fantasy settings, Arthurian legend, all that stuff I was never shy about. What turned me off from, and the resistance to the D&D aspect would because my buddy would just bring it up in a random conversation for almost no need. It was
And that's hard.
unvaluable to the conversation.
I know exactly what you mean.
So I started resisting then. And then, so like I said, that was 98 to 99, and it wasn't until 2001, 2002.
It took you, wow, that they played the long-term game a decade. It took a decade for them to harass you into it.
No, from late 90s to 2001 years, just a few
Oh,
years.
late 90s, my bad.
Yeah. Because I graduated high school in 2003. So it was a year to almost 2 years before I graduated. And then only then I started getting my feet wet. I didn't jump fully in until 2004. About a year after I graduated, I had to look for a different group. But that resistance really, like I said, just came from bad personality experiences. Like it was all the time. It's too much.
I understand. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So it's almost like, it's funny because I tell people, as much as I hold my nerd card, I really don't feel like I deserve it because I am into so many different things. And as a whole, my nerdum is really the smallest part now. It used to be big, but now it's small.
In that the early 2000s to, from late 90s to early 2000s, was there anything that helped you cross the hill? To exit from this, okay, I don't really want to engage with this weird thing my friend is talking about and won't shut up about, to you gave it a shot, and after giving it that shot, you just became very invested. Was there anything that crossed the hill for you, or was it just playing?
Kind of like, why did I switch and decide to give it a try? I'd say I wanted to give it a try primarily because the general genre that I was familiar with in D&D is Tolkien fantasy, essentially. Okay. And to lean into what I just mentioned about how I don't feel like I should have my nerd card, I've never actually read The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
I'm not a big fan of Tolkien's writing style, but it's medieval fantasy, Arthurian fantasy, and magic, which I absolutely love and believe in. So hearing some of the stories about some of the settings and the world settings, I really became invested essentially in lore, and I liked the concept. Okay. So I wanted to give that a try. The game aspect to it was mediocre at best at first. So what I had learned from my first run-in, and this goes way back to, it feels like hours ago when we started this small conversation, but that DM helped me build my character. His experience had led me through, this is Dungeons & Dragons 3.0, and building that character, he taught me something very valuable that I stick with now, and that's experienced help to build a character is fantastic, and if you want to get somebody pretty much up to snuff to play the game and then develop later, help them, essentially build them their first character. You make it melee, because melee is easy to play. Yes. Melee is the easiest way to play if you just want to learn how to play. You roll the dice, figure stuff out. You don't have to have rules on magic. You don't have to have secondary rules.
For those listening, please always be cautious about starting with a caster. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't have someone who's willing to thoroughly explain to you the magic system, while it's not technically complicated, the first time I did it, I had to learn it by myself. And I literally sat there for hours. Mm-hmm. It's like trying to play Monopoly with none of the pieces in hand and trying to just read from the manual and then trying to start.
That's a good way to put it. And like you said, even though it's not necessarily complicated, to break it down, what you're really looking at on the basic level is in a melee character, when you decide to attack, you're using essentially weapons, whereas magic is your weapon for a caster. The difference is that you have such a huge toolbox, yep, and there are so many things that can be used. So when I was learning how to build this character, we started with melee, and he pretty much built that character for me. And then the next character I decided was maybe Melee Plus, and he assisted me in building that character. The third character, he overseen me building my character, which was essentially casting light. And then my last character with him, I had to build completely on my own, and I could choose whatever I wanted, and I opted to go for caster.
Now, for overseeing, do you mean like he had a heavy hand in the creation, or he went through you during your creation process and offered suggestions?
Instead of even offering suggestions, what he would do is he would be there, and I could ask questions, see how things worked out together.
All right, I think that's a very good approach.
I agree, and that's the same approach I continue to use now when anybody's new. They're like, Rob, I want to play this. I want to play a full fucking wizard, and I am balls deep into a million different spells, and I have no idea how to play the game. I don't know how it works. I'm like, slow your roll, bro. Let's probably get you inducted into the game, tell you the concept. We can build a caster, but it's going to be complicated. I suggest you start with Melee to learn the mechanics, and then you just build from there. You know, we can cycle through 3 or 4 characters in a month if you want, but you got to kind of learn the process first. I love the enthusiasm, don't get me wrong. I don't want to dissuade anybody from playing, but learn easy mechanics and then build from there, which is kind of the difficult spot when you started with your group of friends. You're like, let's do it, let's roll them up, let's run through it, and, rules are who needs rules? You don't need rules.
Start when you first start and you create a rogue, and you try to figure out how sneak attack works.
Yeah.
And you guys keep changing your minds.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so that's kind of where I started. The resistance, like I said, personality issues. I turned the page because I really liked lore. And also funny is Magic the Gathering, the card game. I don't play. I don't know how to play. I love the lore. Same thing with Warhammer 40k. Love the lore. Yeah. I don't want to learn the game. I don't want to play the game. My nerd card is really small when I put all this stuff together.
Listen, Rob, just put about $2,000 together. We'll play some Warhammer.
Yeah, if I wanted like 3 minis, that'd be great. It's called Warhammer 40k because it costs 40k to get into, right?
Well, that being said, so it sounds like it was a bit of a rocky start trying to first get engaged with it just because of your own investment. Mm-hmm. But I kind of want to know where things went from there. So you started playing what sounds like 3.0. Did you touch 2 at all? Because I feel like if you started when 3 emerged, there still would have been enough of a resistant community base that still played 2. Is that the case, or do people heavily shift into 3?
So when I started, the group that I started with really was already heavily invested into 3, and we followed it to 3.5 and so forth. I was playing with that particular group for, let's say about a year or so before I switched to my what I actually consider my primary group of friends and players. In between that time, I did play 2nd edition and I played 1st edition, but it was sporadic. It was a few people's preferred editions when I did play, but it was a different DM.
It was just a couple times?
At the time, early on, yeah. I have gone through I'd say a medium-length campaign of 2nd edition. Okay. I like 2nd edition. It's rules light in a good way, but it's too complicated in a bad way because of the light rules, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you have to overcompensate for what's not there.
Yeah, and it makes it really difficult. And things like hardcore mode, as we consider hardcore mode now, or suicide stats, where we're looking at things like you roll your 3d6 in order, and then you generate your character from there. I think we mentioned it last episode where things like being a dwarf is a class, not a race. And it's weirdly set up, especially when you start from options, then go to limiting all your options.
Yeah.
It's different, especially when it's the rules. I don't have a deep love for early editions, but it's not a bad thing.
All right. So as time went on, so we're gonna say you went to like mid to late 2000s. Where did like your D&D experience go? Were you more local based? Is this where you might have started engaging online with people?
So it was about the time where I'm going to say this is all pre-Discord, so forums were still a thing. And
Wait, what is that?
I'm
just joking.
There were Yahoo groups and AOL Messenger chat rooms, and in between my first dip, actually slightly before my first dip, I guess I don't want to overdate myself, because truthfully, my very first foray into role-playing was technically online in the early 90s. I was using a Windows 3.11 based computer operating system.
All right, this is where you actually start to lose me.
Okay.
Because I was born in 93, so...
Okay, so 93, 94, internet was just starting to come out. It was popular, expensive. Computers had just developed visual GUI operating systems, the graphical user interface, and... as any young boy did, the first two things I could figure out were how to look at boobies and how to role play on the internet. And role playing on the internet, I actually started with Dragon Ball Z text-based RPG.
What?
Damn, I love that shit. So everybody knows I'm a huge DBZ nerd, and I can't even say, brah, that it is a guilty pleasure. I love DBZ so openly for my age, and I know
totally fine. That's totally fine.
It's ridiculous, but so that's when I really started, and I resisted actual play for a long time, and then when I made the switch, when I switched from my first group to my primary group, the internet, pre-Discord, still a few forums going on. Meetup.com had just recently started. And now it's a great website that lost some functionality due to things like Facebook. But I used meetup.com to find a friend of mine who was local, looking for players, and just random strangers on the internet. I was like, hey, I'm interested in checking it out. I'm kind of new. I got some experience, though, so let's jump in.
Did you ever just go to game shops? Was that like a normal thing to you?
No. I grew up down the street from a comic book shop, but they didn't do things like Magic the Gathering. They didn't have rule books. It was literally all comic books.
Wow, and this is like mid to late 2000s?
I believe that they shut their doors mid 2000s. It's been a while. It was Apparitions Comics and Books. Absolutely loved the guy who ran it. Closed it 2 or 3 years after he was held up at gunpoint, shot, and robbed for not a whole lot of money as cash register. Anybody who runs a comic book store is dumb. There's not a lot of money there.
No.
So
that's real rough.
Yeah. Could you imagine going to jail for life for $7? I mean, come on. But that's kind of the general history there in a very condensed version. And I didn't go to a lot of game shops. Let's see, that's back when KB Toys was still in the mall. At one point, they had a few books, but role-playing games weren't super popular. You had to go to more specialty stores for them. And I didn't generally go to those stores because I wasn't as well inducted into the culture at the time.
Okay, so this is where we move past, and we definitely passed 2010. So for you, from about 2005 upwards of like finding your most comfortable group of friends to play with, you played with them for a long time. There's not really a reason to heavily seek out others, especially when you're, I believe what you've said in the past is your main groups that you play with consistently kept playing and have consistently kept playing for a very long time.
Yeah.
So would you say, because when 5th edition emerged, D&D is still very not engaged with. It's only in the last 2 years that it's starting to kind of reach mainstream, sort of.
Truthfully, doing what I've been doing in the nerd culture, there's a different word I want to use, but I'm going to stick with culture specifically, primarily because I don't want to use the other word. Sour spot. Anyhow, I have been in some capacity news related or news adjacent to the nerd culture for at least 7 years.
Okay.
So I'm going to say that even as far back as 7 years ago, we started breaching main culture because of things like football teams. I forgot what specific football team it was, but they would talk about how they'd play Settlers of Catan for a team building exercise. And Settlers of Catan is actually a very heavy nerd game.
Yes.
It's got a lot of aspects that casual gamers enjoy, but it's very niche, however you want to say it.
There's a crap ton of versions. I'm huge into board games. Settlers of Catan is like one I definitely need to pick up. But yeah, there's like 30 versions of it, multiple expansions. Yeah. That one's crazy. That's a classic.
It is. So when I use that particular moment as this sort of shift, because that's when a lot of celebrities started talking about how they did things like play Dungeons and Dragons. You know, Stephen Colbert talked about it. Vin Diesel talked about it. A few of the other ones. What is late night talk show? The older guy, David Letterman, I think it is. I think he did it a little bit, or maybe it's a different one. I don't know. But anyhow, all these celebrities started really talking about it. And
is that kind of when you realized, like, D&D was this small world thing to you and your friends that you and all the other degenerates, kept in your secret cult, and then realized the cult's gotten much bigger?
I think that's really about the time that we realized we didn't have to play in the basement anymore, so to speak. It's really the time we realized it. So I would say that truthfully, that's probably right about just before you got into it personally. And I think that culture shift has been noticed by a lot of different people, because that influx, we can truthfully say about 8 years ago, which is when 5th edition came out.
Yep.
That influx in new players was also about the time when celebrities started breaking the mold on being forthright that say, hey, we play D&D, we have for years, we like it. And then in retrospect, we can look at all of these people who are in celebrity status that you can just tell there's something a little weird about them. And usually the thing that's weird about them is they have some sort of attachment or association with nerd culture. And whether it's directly tabletop games or adjacent, it's tied to it somehow. That openness, I think, is really when it switched up. But I do think that by the time it switched, I was already well endowed with my current group. I still play with them on occasion. It didn't stop me from looking for other groups, but the pandemic is what changed things up the most.
Oh yeah, that is a topic we should talk about at some point.
I do think we should. We tried to cover it a little bit when it happened. I think that was covered once when we talked about some of the history of Epic Table, because we looked for a way to take it online without doing Discord. I wanted to go with the play-by-post style. But when everything shut down, obviously our group went on hiatus, and right now they're playing online. And I don't mind online, but I don't know, my schedule is not conducive at the moment. I am so busy that I pretty much have one day carved out, and that is for a game I run at this point.
Yep.
It's difficult. Again, stark difference between where you get to start and kind of where I got to start. You had the resources for the internet. You had a million different tutorials by that point, character builds. Yep. You had a bunch of history. You've seen things poured over, and I got to experience it in a different way. I'm not going to say it was firsthand. More of a hands-on mentor person who got to watch over it. And you mentioned that if you're just starting out, follow a module or a pre-written campaign, or depending on what game you're playing, has different terms, campaign, path, etc. I got right into homebrew, and it was all homebrew.
Interesting.
One of the cool things that I liked about that is that people's inspiration generally comes from other material and media that I liked, watched, or followed, books, movies, etc. So it was kind of fun. That's what I really liked about it, actually, is seeing references to other things. Hence why I put a lot of funny pop culture references in a lot of my games.
Yep, sure. Like that's not a bad thing at all. That's actually quite fun.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it to you. I don't remember if we talked about it online. One of the last campaigns I ran, the world had a calamitous event that lasted for 11 minutes, and
what? What?
A calamitous event that happened for 11 minutes.
Is that even? How does that functionally work?
Well, truthfully, the material plane I assumed was on Earth, and it stopped rotating for 11 minutes, which truthfully would completely destroy Earth.
Okay.
But it's fantasy, so it didn't.
Yeah.
And nobody questioned it, and it made me so upset. You're like, Rob, why 11 minutes? Nobody asked.
I think the idea is just so jarring that they were struggling to pick up on the idea.
I don't think so, because they just rolled with it. They're like, whatever, let's go.
Jeez.
So, and truthfully, the pop culture reference is Final Tap. Like, why not 10 minutes? Well, because it's not 10, it's 11. Well, why don't you make 11 10? Make it just better, more. No, then it's not 11. That's how I rolled with it. And nobody asked, and it was upsetting. And that still burns a little bit, man.
Oh, they didn't pick up your joke?
No,
oh, buddy.
They didn't pick up most of my pop culture references.
You sitting in the background silently in your head. It's funny. It's funny.
Dude, I do. People, you can hear me pouting now. I think it's true. I think it's true to any DM when you have what you consider a really awesome point that you want people, and they just don't.
Yeah.
And
just don't. I always say you can throw in whatever joke you want, but don't pause for your friends to laugh, because you're gonna get got. You're gonna get slapped down emotionally when they don't laugh at it.
Every time.
Yep.
So one of the things I mentioned that I want to ask you about is when you look for story inspiration, like where do you pull from the most?
Okay, so for me, I kind of suffer a bit from the thing that's talked about where I kind of partake in some media and it starts affecting kind of my subconscious where I might inject it a bit into my game.
Nothing wrong.
I try not to do it too hard because it doesn't need to be a problem, but it can turn into one. So for an easy example, I was watching a lot of Resident Evil 2 and 3 content because those video games came out in the last few years. I realized during one of my really fun sessions, I basically copied Resident Evil 2, because I believe that's the one with the police station.
I think so.
Yeah, so what happened was I basically had a tyrant-esque character that they saw from across the closed door. They were freaked out by, they were afraid to approach. A couple guards were like, they're killing us, like, don't go near that thing. And the area is also filled with zombies and stuff. They also found a couple keys. I'm like, I just copied Resident Evil. Crap. But you know what? A lot of the players were not well associated with the Resident Evil series. And so for the majority of them, that was really fun. And for the one who was, it was still really fun.
I think that's appropriate. I don't find any problem. Truthfully, in my opinion, you could take your favorite anything, steal absolutely everything.
You need to give it a fresh coat of paint and be reasonable about how you insert it in the game. But this is where I have to bring up this problem. There have been a lot of games in the last, I'm going to say 2 to 3 years, where it's about collecting the stones that help control the universe and stopping the bad guy from collecting them.
All right, to be fair,
you didn't do it,
to be fair, I have not run the game.
Okay.
Prior to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, before that even started, I had been in multiple games of the same storyline.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's not like it's new.
Right, it existed before.
Yeah.
My problem is a lot of games turned into that.
Yeah.
That's the real problem, is you're not really putting the fresh coat of paint on it when you make it way too similar. So a good example is a lot of players had it where, because the similar concept is like, collect the legendary weapon artifacts, use them to defeat the bad guys. The thing, that is a different flavor than collecting the Infinity Stones. The bad coat of paint is, there are 4 gems that you collect that'll end the world, and you have to keep them away from the bad guy. you are leaning way too close into the territory without reflavoring it.
Yeah.
If you reflavor those gems as just weapons, it's already a vastly different approach. The bad guy can't use that many weapons at once. It's more intended that the players are going to use them. There's a lot of different aspects that actually change it up and make it much more reasonable. So for mine, with the Resident Evil one, that is not really a fresher coat of paint, and that's why I had a problem with it later in afterwards. But the thing is the scenario is very fun to play out, and a lot of the players weren't even associated with the content.
Right.
That's what makes the Infinity Stones one bad. Most of us know about it, and so therefore, when you copy it so closely, it ends really poorly, or it just comes off as really goofy and jarring. Same thing with Star Wars content. That actually happens a lot.
Yeah, I can definitely say that. Now, before we move on, I know that we're picking up this background noise. This guy's hitting the lawn with a weed whacker, all right? And it sounds like he's going buck wild with this thing at full power and 1,000 goddamn RPMs.
Actually, that's my secret pet hedgehog.
So, if the guy with the weed whacker doesn't put down the hedgehog, I'm going to put down the guy with the weed whacker at this point. So if you guys are picking up on it, we're just going to let it roll. Honestly, it's funny. The truth is, I mean, podcasts, as much as we try to be professional, as much as we try to keep this in a controlled environment, the entire world lives around us, and we can't control absolutely everything.
We'll do the best we can.
Yeah, so sorry about the background distraction, but truthfully, we love you guys. Just deal with it.
Yeah, and if you hear it, that's your fault. If you let that invade your mind while we're trying to talk, that's actually your fault, and you should feel bad.
As we're here focusing on it, because it's annoying us.
So what I want to talk about is like kind of where my content went as I played D&D. So this was about 2016, like maybe like late 2016. We did that one thing, and then it got put on pause, and I was super into it. I really wanted to play again, but the brother like actually moved away, and we didn't know when we'd get to play again. So I just kind of let it go. I would say it was late 2017. There was a roommate of my brother's, and just out of nowhere, he was like, yeah, I play D&D. I've played for 5 or 6 years. I'm also a DM, and here's several books I have. And
nice.
I went, maybe we could try playing just one time.
Let's do it right.
So it was him as the DM. It was actually my close friend, me, and my older brother. We played one session, and this was not super well set up. His experience was more in 3, and he had a little bit of 5 content. And he was trying to run all of it off the top of his head. That's its own conversation.
We should have that later, by the way.
Yeah. But it was insanely fun, and I was extremely invested immediately. And I was like, this is for me. It's what I want.
Right.
We played that one session, and it just didn't happen again. And I knew it wouldn't happen again because people weren't as available. My brother immediately was uninterested. That's because he sucks. That's just the way it is.
That's fair.
So at this point, it's about October, November. This is actually around the time that my child is born.
Oh.
So the birth of my child is actually the signifier of really when I start playing Dungeons and Dragons. So my approach was I tried to learn as best I could, and I was very nervous about starting it crappy from my previous 2 experiences. What I did was I took some of my online friends that I played a lot of League of Legends with. I explained to them the concept of the game. They were interested, but they had never heard of the game before, and they were only kind of entertaining the idea.
Sure.
So I prepped as much as I could. I created essentially what was like a one-shot, 2-shot session. And keep in mind, this was very rough, but I did it on purpose. I ran the game. I was able to work out a lot of the very poor conversation quality parts where you're going, and just doing that relentlessly. I was able to kick a lot of that out of my speech. I also didn't know how to do attack rolls or damage.
That's funny.
I would have someone roll a d20, and I would just essentially copy what people call severity.
Okay.
I'd be like, oh yeah, you rolled so high. Oh yeah, it like fully kills them.
That's funny.
I was like it's too much to learn how to do full combat, which I was wrong. Because if I had run my normal games like that, they would have been total trash.
Sure, but again, I mean, we're just talking about getting into this, really. I mean, at this point, you're waist deep.
Yeah, so at this point, I did that, I practiced, I learned from it, and then about a month and a half later, I started my first real campaign. And I had pulled myself forward. I was like, I learned everything I needed to about combat, but once again, I was heading everything off on my own. Players had to come to me for everything. I didn't have answers for everything. One of my players was a warlock. For those of you who've played Warlock or DMs who run Warlocks, they are vastly different than other casters. They they only have a couple spell slots, and they recover on short rests versus all other casters who are long rest.
Now, see, this is really funny because this shows a difference between 5th edition and earlier editions, because while they were still different, they were not as vastly different as you get to experience now. So it was essentially an easier, more spontaneous arcane casting ability versus a full wizard. You didn't have to have the attunement to any sort of book or spell book. It was all off the top of your head. You could prepare spells just as similarly. Usually, we didn't have long rests, short rests. We had essentially full rest. And that was if you rested for X amount of time over a set period of time. So it was 4 hours out of a 24-hour period where you do nothing but rest. You could reallocate spell slots. If you take a full rest, you get all your spell slots back. Obviously, you can see where that shifted from that system into short rest, full rest, or long rest, excuse me. But they were way more similar than they are now.
Yeah, that's super interesting, though. Well, either way, so basically, that campaign I will always reference as my grindstone to DMing.
Okay.
I approached many of my failures as a DM in that first campaign. I went through even a lot of my own personal issues, like essentially all my poor players had to put up with me dealing with struggles to maintain not friendships, but being like, oh yeah, I don't want to hurt my friends' feelings. Matt Mercer syndrome, just overall being paranoid, like putting players on a pedestal and then just being in my own head about how to handle RP and stuff. So those are stories I'll definitely go over in the future. But I will always say I will always appreciate that first campaign because it took me being absolutely horrible at it to be good at it now.
I agree with that sentiment, not just for your personal case, but everybody's case. And I think a lot of what you really mentioned just a second ago also plays into what we wanted to talk about if we had time today, and that's general table etiquette.
Absolutely.
It's really funny to correlate those things. So I want to keep talking about that experience that you had, especially the grindstone, because we all have similar situations that are like that. Whether it's not understanding the rules or how we want to approach the game, we look at things along the lines of, I'll use one of my examples of when I learned what not to do, and that was when you're in a town and you get a mission, not everybody's going to have the information. Some might have portions or pieces, or it might be incredibly vague. My players hated that. Like, why does it have to be so vague? Like, nobody knows anything. Well, yeah. You got to figure out who to talk to. And I was like, damn. I realized that
you have to do a little bit of babysitting.
Yeah, just let them. They're not going to talk to anybody that has no information. And truthfully, you don't have to role play them finding the information. You just...
Well, that's a mistake that a lot of DMs will make. Interesting point. For you experienced what was a lot of natural grind set when it comes to your experience. Your experience with your game is over the course of a small age. Mine is a curated experience over the course of internet culture. So, interestingly enough, you usually will have more flexibility when it comes to this wide spectrum of ideas and things. For me, it's only because I've engaged with so much internet experience of someone going, well, this didn't work, this did work, that I essentially skip that. It doesn't always mean it works. And it also can mean, like, maybe I'm not as versatile because I haven't had that 20 years of experience.
I think the versatility comes from two direct points that are correlating but are still indirect, if that makes sense. I think that the experience allows for a specific type of versatility, because we have enough experience to have experienced multiple different situations, and you can cherry pick from what you need. I think the other part is really the ability to improv, and that is standalone from the gaming systems itself. I mean, to have the ability to improvise on a dime is generally well accepted and well received. The longer you take to develop a response to any kind shows, I don't want to say a lack of interest, but that's how a lot of people look at it.
That's also with the expectation that, like, there's the weird fetishization in culture that if you're a DM who can't do everything on the fly, you're a bad DM. It's not great.
There is, and there's also the reverse, the exact polar opposite, that if you're not prepared to handle everything, you're a bad DM. Mm-hmm. And I mean, truthfully, the best DM is apparently sitting right on the edge of that coin. In between the ridges of the quarter, there you are. That's the DM. So the 20 years history did not teach me the improvisation. My enjoyment of improvisation taught that. The versatility of handling situations taught me how to be responsive. Yeah. But if you don't have a response immediately, so many players are like, you're not prepared. I don't like this. You're a shitty DM.
That's actually a good chunk of responses. That will happen a lot in random groups. People that you don't know that well that aren't going to be patient and respectful.
Yep.
But when it comes to a lot of personal friends, it goes so much smoother.
Yeah.
And I'll be open and apparent. I'm one of the DMs who will demystify, and I'll even put down the screen and just be like, hey, I don't have this prepared, or I'm sorry, but I'm not going to spend 30 minutes of the session trying to figure out how to potion craft with you. Right. Let's just sit down out of the session, and then we move on.
All right. So it sounds like we cannot refuse the etiquette portion of what we wanted to talk about.
That is, I think we need to go into that for sure.
Okay. And there are a few things that we just mentioned that I have to really applaud and make sure that we reiterate that newer DMs just do not do. And the reason I want to do this is because it's super important on a few fronts. You did mention that as a DM, if you're not going to sit down for 30 minutes in potion craft, that is a smart decision. Give a quick ruling or say, hey, whatever potions that you're going to fabricate, make, and do, we will handle. You will have it now, but we will explain the process outside of session.
Yep.
There are many things where don't take time to find a ruling on something specific, small, or insignificant. That's a big thing for me. If somebody wants to spend 30 minutes debating a specific rule, I don't want to take that time as a DM.
Yeah, you have to be reasonable and just at a certain point create the cutoff and go, I'm sorry, but for the sake of everyone else, your 30 minutes is it. You've stolen time from everyone else.
Right.
I understand we're trying to figure it out, but we're going to keep it reasonable.
Make a ruling, any ruling at this point. It doesn't matter if it follows raw, it doesn't matter if it follows rules. Make a ruling, and then you can even add the caveat, hey, if it's not quite right, we'll discuss it and we'll make the changes further. But right now, this is how it's going to roll because we cannot dedicate X amount of time to this. Again, that's on the DM side for etiquette. The player side of etiquette, please do not take an hour for a turn. All right?
Oh my gosh.
Be considerate.
Yes.
I want my players to be considering their next turn or their next few turns, so when it gets to them in initiative, they can flow through.
Yeah, so you're talking about combat etiquette. I love that, and this is so important. My personal rules, if you're a spellcaster, if you're going to cast a spell, you pull up the spell on your phone, because if I don't know what the spell is or I don't know what it does, I will have you read it off, or you know how it works because you have it out. Mm-hmm. Because if you go to cast a spell and I don't recognize the spell, I'm sorry, I'm going to look at it. It's a very, very common case that players do not fully read their spells and mess up certain mechanics.
Yeah.
So please, in between turns, I know it's not the easiest and that things can change, but if you're a caster, immediately look up your spell, decide what your spell is, and have it ready for if I have questions.
Right. What I like to do, and thank God the technology has been able to keep up with this, I usually have my computer with me. And I do that because I can access absolutely everything in seconds. It's easier than looking at my phone. I can keep notes tracking. So if somebody says a spell I'm not familiar with, or a specific feat I'm not familiar with, or anything, honestly, I can just quickly Google. And I know that there's not one situation that has not been encountered previously. I mean, we've talked about the community being big, but how big is it? Any question, any situation has been thought of, discussed, debated, rules lawyered to death, and broken down to just do what you want. But the fact is, nothing is new. No idea in this community is new. It has been talked about before. So Reddit is a great place to go if you need a quick ruling on how it's supposed to go, if you want somebody to debate and bitch for an hour.
I think at this point, that's where you're referencing things like Jeremy Crawford, I believe, is the guy who, like, people ask questions, and he is like the huge reference for answers.
A lot of times, yeah, absolutely. So, you can read up on just about any rule, feat, anything is already stated. So you just Google edition, like 5th edition, spell name, answer is right there within the first 3 search results.
The solution from the DM side about how to handle combat with players who aren't moving quick enough, don't be over aggressive. Definitely be patient, and then after the session, be like, "Hey, I noticed you're taking a bit longer in your turns. For example, I have a fighter. Your big thing is you swing your weapon, and that's your turn. I know you can do more, but there's no reason that I should get to your turn, pause, flip through pages, minute goes by, and I weapon attack. If you are a fighter or have limited options, please be reasonable that if your normal thing is attack, go for attack. If you have other stuff, keep it in mind and be ready for it." So the way it works is, if your players truly cannot handle the time limit, or truly cannot handle the idea of a combat pace, set a minute and give them a minute. If they don't do it, be like, "Hey, we'll move on." You either can come back to them, which I don't necessarily recommend, but you can also be like, "Your character dodges." That's actually not a terrible option, because at the very least, now there's disadvantage on attacks against them, and that's more for 5th edition, but in general, defensive options that protect their character is much better. Do not just blatantly end their turn. If you skip their turn completely, you have a very angry player.
Absolutely. And sometimes, I will say, it depends on the group. I don't like to do it very often, but if somebody's taking a long time, I'm saying, "All right, you're going to hold your action. When you know what you're going to do, let me know, and we will put you in initiative at that point."
Yeah.
So we just reorganize initiative. And I don't like to set a general timer, because sometimes people are trying to figure out tactics with other players. I do this, and that's fine, but at that point, it's a group activity.
Yeah, to me, the timer is an extreme case.
Yeah.
Where, like, if you have 6 players, let's say each player takes 3 minutes, 2-3 minutes. Yeah, so the next time the next player gets to go is 15-20 minutes later.
Right.
That really sucks.
It does, and it absolutely does, especially...
Combat drags.
Oh, God, it's horrible. And when you mentioned the fighter, who pretty much has essentially the same tool bag to work with every round, it's only going to take them seconds. If a fighter's looking for something specific, which I do sometimes as a melee class, I'll be looking how to not just get through my current round, but maybe set up for the next round.
Yeah.
Let me make sure this feat or this ability works the way I want it to, because that's going to dictate how I do right now. Not very often, because I love playing melee classes. I can turn my brain off and roll. But that consideration for time, I think, is really important. And as we talk about time in game, I think it's also important to talk about showing up on time.
Oh, okay.
And I've had players, one recently, rage quit my campaign because other players could not show up on time.
All right. Yeah, this is probably the biggest point of conflict when it comes to table discussions, because this is truly the largest grayscale of table etiquette issues. Like you said, that player, I'm sorry, but it does sound pretty bullheaded to just be like, "Oh, players aren't making it, so I duck out." Okay, yes, there is a reasonable point where you can be like, "This is not the table for me." It doesn't sound like he did that.
Talking about this player, I really enjoyed the player. He was a newer player, and he really went full invested into this. I got him into the hobby itself less than a year and a half ago, and he has gone from a player to a primary DM in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, Starfinder, and Pathfinder. He is fully invested. He's really good at it. He did not
I'm used to the full investment, but that's crazy.
Yeah,
wow.
he went all in. And his big thing is time is absolutely paramount. If you're going to commit to a time, you are there at that time. And if you are not there at that time, you are not welcome to come back next game. And
Damn, that's rough. But yeah, so that's where we reach the point of contention. So for proper table etiquette, you have a lot of ways to handle it. But the biggest point is you need to put your foot down.
Mm-hmm.
If it is a weekly game, you need to be a little flexible. If you're going to expect that a group of 4+ people have to show up at the same time every single week, you need to be, one, communicative. You have to talk. And if the plans change. And you either change date or you change time. Now, of course, this shouldn't happen every week, but you have to remain open to it. Now, if you wait bigger gaps of time, you need to be more strict. So if it's every 2 weeks, you kind of need to hold them accountable when they're not making it to a game that happens twice a month. And if it's beyond that, they should be making it to every game. If it's a once a month game, you need to make it to it on time.
And I agree with that, because when you're looking at a once a month game, you're generally figuring out a schedule far enough in advance to be able to plan things around it accordingly. Of course, things come up. We understand that. And especially when you're planning out longer stretches, more likely things can come up. But because you're in the books, it gives you a broader stroke to plan around it. At the bi-weekly level, which I really enjoy, it's frequent enough where you should be able to say, I got a game every other Friday at 7 p.m. Bro, that's scheduled weekly. I hate having to check in with my players. Are we playing this week? Like, it sucks.
My gosh.
It sucks so bad. I do it because my players are used to it, and I want to verify that people aren't just going to not show up, and sometimes I forget people's schedule. So I think etiquette-wise, just checking in, make sure things are going down. It's fine, but I expect to play, and I expect my players to expect to play.
If you're going to DM games, I will promise you, it doesn't matter what game or edition or how many players you have, there will be babysitting.
Oh, yeah.
Like Rob just said, yes, you will every time. If you do not message the day before and go, hey, is everyone available for tomorrow? Like, just checking in. If you don't do that, there will be call-ins almost every time.
And that's something that I've noticed more recently than before. Like I said, with my primary group, we didn't have to check in. It was just assumed. Everybody assumed. For over 6 years, every Friday, we were going to be there. We didn't have to double check. We didn't have to call in. We didn't have to see what's up. We knew 6 p.m. there. Yeah. And that was it. That's not the case anymore. And
that's an interesting issue mix between investment in the game and time schedule available. Because to me, the reason I'm a little stricter on time is because if you are being respectful and invested in the game, you are not constantly doing things that interfere with that schedule. So, for example, I changed my work schedule. Okay, there are a lot of benefits in my life that made it a necessity to change work schedule. That is a necessary change.
Yeah.
If you are doing things like, oh, I wanted to go for the next 3 months, I have this thing going on, and it always occurs on our D&D day. Okay, it doesn't have to be a problem, but what you do respectfully is you go, hey, I'm going to step away from the table for a few months, just letting you know. That is totally and completely fine and respectable. But when people are like, oh yeah, I stayed up the night before, now I'm too tired to make it. To me, that's totally disrespectful towards myself and the rest of the players.
Yeah, I agree. And what you had just mentioned about, hey, I got to step away, I've had to do that. In fact, I just had to do that with your game that we usually play on a Saturday night. And partially that is because of everything going on in my life. I'm like, between travel time, distance, gas, my wife's schedule, my schedule, this is becoming really unmanageable. And I let everybody know, granted it was a few days before game, but like, hey, I'm looking at this and I've been looking at this, I'm going to have to step out for a little bit.
And that's so much more appreciated because that stuff, a lot of people who have that situation mention it at the last literal minute, or they drag you through the mud until you're sick of it.
Yeah, or they just stop showing up and you don't know what happened.
Yeah. So, overall, please, you need to learn when to put your foot down about the game. Yes, you do not need to be a jerk about it, but if you don't put your foot down, other players will step away from the game or they'll just stop being invested. I actually have a bit of this problem right now in my main campaign But then again, I've played that campaign for about a year and a half now, so of course people's schedules will change. But it also means that you need to recognize that if you're not available, just step away until you are available.
Right, and I think it's fair because you're not specific on DM or player specific. It's as a player, and DM is considered a player in this case as well. It's fair on both cases. That breaks down to the fact that you need to have that communication. And communication, I think, is paramount to etiquette, but it still needs to be respectful. And while you've outright said it, it's the first time I'm outright saying it as well. That conversation that you have between players, inter-conversation and exterior conversations about game, not about game, still needs to be respectful. And there are still topics that you shouldn't talk about at the table because most people can't remain respectful about them.
Yes. So I guess this is where we'll lead into the communication aspect of etiquette. So the one I'm going to refer to is in and out of game table talk. There is actually quite an interesting issue when it comes to player DM engagement. So, for example, if let's say a player wants something done for their backstory, and they want that included in the game, it's totally fine and reasonable to bring it up to the DM. What's not reasonable is demanding things. DMs have a certain amount of time and availability, and even if they don't need to worry about those things, they don't have to do it for you.
Right.
But at the same time, realize that when your player is cordially asking you for something, and you're just not working with them on it, they just won't be invested in your game.
Right.
So there needs to be a certain level of respect between communication, time-wise, because there's no reason that a player should message you. Let's say it's a weekly game. They message you the day after the game, and you don't respond until the day before the game. That's it's kind of unreasonable, really.
I agree with that, especially with today's fast-paced world with technology. I mean, I know people look at texting like I can respond to it when I get to it. It's not as important as a telephone call, but I would say standards of today have really said if you go 2 days without responding, you're kind of being a dick.
Yeah, and I actually totally agree with that.
I don't agree with that methodology. I don't think it's fair, and I think if you're not treating your players fairly, it's a disrespect situation. And again, that's from a DM perspective. I think inter-player communication the same way. If players are messaging in a group situation, it may not be pertinent to everybody in the group. Don't reply, fine. But if you're asking somebody a question and they just don't respond, that's disrespectful. And it eventually translates to real feelings at the table.
Yeah.
And you don't want that either.
And then we lead to part 2 of communication, which is inappropriate talk that can occur at the table. So this one affects your game less if you're at the table with your personal friends, but it still can. So for example, I will intentionally do this when I set up a game with random people, whether it's online or it's in person, but it's where I live. I will look up their Facebook profile and I will check it, not because I'm unwilling to have a conservative and a liberal at the same table, but if you have your Facebook flooded with political stuff, I am a debate pervert. I will debate someone into the ground, not because it gets us anywhere, but because it's fun. And I'm not proud of that, but it feels good, even though everyone loses.
I understand.
But I know how to rein that in. Other people, not so much. So what I avoid is other potential debate perverts harassing people that don't want to talk about political stuff,
right,
or other topics that are inane to the player, where they just are here to play D&D. They're not here for necessarily that aspect.
Right.
They're here for the social aspect of playing the game together. They're not here to have a interpersonal conversation with another player that they don't want to engage on.
Right. And like you had mentioned, it's a little different when you have a group of closer friends, because you can let it go on for a little bit longer. You know that next week is your guy's going to show up. Not
your literal friends who've probably known each other for longer. Yeah. It's way more acceptable and totally comfortable.
Right. But for a majority of tables, even if you're close friends, people look at the DM as a head of the table, their control of the entire flow, the night, etc.
Yeah.
So it comes down to, if the conversation starts to veer too far off track or gets too heated, it's up to the DM primarily. But anybody at this point can step in and say, hey, let's rein it in and let's get back.
Yeah, also, do keep an eye out, because DMs can even be guilty of it themselves. So, I can bring up things like, players are here to play a game. you can get inappropriate situations of like other players flirting or saying inappropriate things that set off or make other players upset. Be very careful about this. You need to recognize when a player is uncomfortable. I'm sorry, and I know it puts a lot of pressure on the DM, but the DM, like you just said, is recognized as kind of the figurehead of the table. So you can tell them to stop, but you need to also see that, one, if it's welcomed between the two people, if it's horribly off track or we need to get focused, but on the or that the person initiating it is just making people uncomfortable and they're not backing down when you're saying let's move on. You need to keep track of those people, because when you have people doing that and they're blatantly disrespectful, they are going on like a weird ego trip, and it's
I can see that.
You do not want those players at the table, because that will never stop.
To say it can never stop, I don't necessarily agree with. And I'll give you an example here because it does play heavily. I play with a consistent group. I actually play with 2 or 3 consistent groups. I play primarily with males, and I've got 5 or 6 different females that will rotate in frequently enough to say that I play with many, many women. And there are 2 or 3, I think it's 3 now, because the last young woman has just been married recently. Nope, I just started playing with another girl. So one of the other women had been married. She plays with her husband at the table, and that's fine. And one of our other male players initiated what I would actually consider sexual harassment, and both were okay with it, and I found it irritating. Like, I didn't say anything about it just because it's, whatever. They will initiate it. They didn't bother them. It just seemed disrespectful and borderline sexual harassment. So what I make sure to institute is essentially zero sexual harassment style policy.
To be clear, a lot of women will tolerate it and smile along.
Yeah. Or engage or encourage just to essentially lessen the blow.
Yep.
So I don't allow any sort of sexual harassment. We're not talking about your boobs. We're not talking about your body figure. We're not sexualizing general characteristics of you personally. We're just not going to have it. If we're going to go that route, it's time to essentially stop the game, because I'm not going to have them sit there and be subjected to this. When we talk about etiquette, I mean, that is absolutely paramount in this situation, especially because we're talking about a culture that female representation in general is limited. Most experiences are horrible, and that's primarily because most male figures in this hobby are weird, unhygienic, nerdy individuals who have zero social ability skills outside of their friends and don't understand how to handle a majority of cross-sexual relations and communications.
Now, Rob, you got to be careful. You just horribly offended a lot of the male audience right now. You accused us all of being degenerates. See, the thing is I mostly agree with you. A lot of us are degenerates. The real issue is, in our culture, our culture develops a lot of kind of incel behavior, and sadly, a lot of us who seek social ability kind of lean into D&D because it's their chance to be social at a table where they feel welcome. So all I'm going to say is, for players and DMs who kind of see these situations and struggle, please try to be brave. Don't be afraid to stand up for your friends who are being made uncomfortable.
And to the people who refuse to let their general behavior
grossness
go, grossness is a great way to put it. Be better.
Yes.
I mean, I don't care what people are conditioned to do, say, think, or see, but I think it's a personal responsibility to be better.
Yeah, easy way to put it, don't make it about you, make it about them.
Not about their boobs.
No.
Don't talk about them. That's not what Josh is saying.
That's making it about you, because you're interested in them and you're trying to enforce your will onto them by doing that. So think about them. Do you think they want to hear that from you? No. Don't say it. please try to remove those things from the equation for yourself.
Now, I think that this plays into a current social environment too. That's it's removed from etiquette, but I want to point it out because as I've been watching the world change on such a dramatic shift day to day, everybody has seen those videos on how men get turned down from women versus how women get turned down from men. And we see that dramatic shift. Like, men are generally much more gentle in turning down a woman. A woman is way more aggressive. And they are more aggressive because they have to be. And they have to be, it's not a personal thing. They have to be because they deal with it every second of every day. And it's bullshit, by the way. I absolutely hate it. I hate how they turn down men. I hate that men are constantly advancing. It's not fair on either event. I do not blame the woman, but to see it at a table where the community game should take place is wrong. And that's, like I said, I will not tolerate any sort of situation that's going to make my players feel uncomfortable or awkward in a way that should make the entire table feel weird. Like, if nobody's going to say anything, I'm going to say something.
A piece of advice I'm going to give for kind of a final point on this, if you are the person struggling, like you almost can't help yourself and you're still acting this way, this is kind of an easy method that I had to find because I actually used to be kind of a shitty person. I used to be kind of incel-like a bit. Pull sex from the mind. Like, just let it go. Mm-hmm. Like, engage with someone and go and tell yourself, I will never have sex with them. I'm not going to have sex with them. You'd be surprised at how well that actually can help you overcome, and you actually can help alleviate the objectifying of the other person. Mm-hmm. It really does help.
It does. And I will say that many times, and now this is funny, this is what I found to be normal human nature. Everybody checks out everybody.
Yep.
It's not a male to female, female to male. It's male to male, female to... Everybody checks out everybody. And it comes down to people who are more comfortable in their skin, their body, their sexuality. At some point, you look at that person and be like, yo, totally could or could not on the scale of 1 to 10, do them or not do them. Human nature, sure, shut up about it.
Yes.
Keep it quiet.
Yes.
Don't let it affect how you talk to somebody. Somebody can be attractive, but just because they're attractive doesn't mean we're going to go out and try to bed them. Just because they're attractive doesn't mean anything other than they are pleasing to the eye and they're great at the table. That's fine. Don't let it affect it.
And please recognize that, like, if you act that way and you, like, deter people, you're really just stopping them from ever being your friend.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, that actually, like, okay, let's live in the world where you think you're going to do it, like, you're going to be able to bed them. You're just taking steps backwards.
Oh, yeah.
Like, when you bring that stuff up, women, men, doesn't matter who, if they just think you want to have sex with them, they just want nothing to do with you. You're literally treating them like an object.
Yep.
They don't think that you're engaging or nice. They just don't want to be near you.
And then all of a sudden you're down one player.
Yep.
And, you only have yourself to blame that you're kind of crushing the entire group. And then some players aren't going to pick up on it. They're going to be like, well, why'd they leave? Well, it's because, that guy over there was just kind of being a jerk and he didn't realize it. And now I got to talk to him about it and try to see who I want to keep at the table and who I want to kick out or bring back.
And what's worse is if you keep him, he's just permanently a person that could potentially get people to leave.
Yes, and that is what I wanted to touch on because in one of the first situations I had where they were making one of my female players feel super uncomfortable, after 10 years, which is a decade, it's a long time, mm-hmm. I continued to play with this guy. We still had females rotate in and out of this group, but I watched him get better over a really long time.
You are too patient, my guy.
Process. I've been friends with this guy for a long time.
My gosh.
I gave people warnings. I gave them heads up. I tried to soften the blow as much as I could because
you're throwing me into that gray zone right now.
I knew he had potential to be better, and I harped on him to stay on a positive path to be better. I mean, this was not somebody I would ever try to set up in a relationship with anybody under any circumstance for any means whatsoever. He was the kind of person I'd be like, yo, on a dark street, do not leave your kid at home with this guy. Do not approach this guy.
Oh, my God.
But after 10 years, I can say that his views have changed enough where it is not distracting or in a way harmful to the table.
Do you recommend that piece of advice to anyone?
Stick with somebody for 10 years?
If you have like this really shitty guy at your table, hang around for 10 years until he improves.
You know, a big part of me says, no, I don't want to recommend that. But at the same time, I don't want to gatekeep and say that person should be ostracized either. I think it's a personal decision at that point.
Yeah.
Talking about that in its sense of etiquette, I think you have to set your own precedent. You either have to allow it or disallow it. And then if you are going to allow it, your only next viable option is to find players who are accepted that it is the way it is and are okay with it enough.
Yeah, see, that's where we start to agree. But I'm always, you know me, I'm the safety net guy.
Yeah.
I absolutely would have just kicked him out without a second thought.
You know, I'm to the point where if somebody can't stop after I've said something, I will.
Yeah,
but,
extreme cases.
Yeah.
No one's on the same page for extreme cases.
Right, and it's one of those scenarios. I think the other big thing about etiquette is hygiene.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I've played with, I've mentioned it at least twice since we've started this together. We are famous for having bad hygiene as nerds. It's a stereotype, and stereotypes are usually based off of things that are true. And I've played with people who smell really bad.
Imagine it like this. A lot of us are unsociable. We're not going out to hang out with people. Doesn't always have to be partying. It can literally just be leaving your home to go hang out with people. Mm-hmm. So, of course, you're not spending time with people who might let you know that you might smell a bit.
Yeah.
But also, it's kind of hard to consistently clean up. And so you're just not used to it. And then you start playing, and now things surprise you. My recommendation with hygiene, I literally, 10, 15 minutes before you go, brush your teeth. You don't even have to go over the top. If you literally just take a clean toothbrush with water, brush out your teeth, already way better. Mouthwash helps more. Don't use alcohol. Mouthwash, deodorant. It only takes a second to put deodorant on, guy. Yeah. If you don't, there's so many little things you can do that just make it 10 times better. Please do them.
Right. And we bring this up primarily because when we play, we're generally in a confined space by some degree.
Yep.
In close quarters.
Yep.
And we're not talking about general personal preferences. There are some people who I'll say absolutely hate deodorant. Whatever. That's fine. It's not bad to hate deodorant. Mm-hmm. We're just asking to find a way to freshen up where you feel comfortable being in a close situation where other people are not going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, you fine. Use a light cologne, something, and I say light because cologne can be quite strong. And once again, if you're at a tight table, you're going to choke people like me out. I have bad sense of smell, but cologne chokes me.
Same. And it's one of those situations where, as we talk about etiquette, we have to really consider the people we're sitting next to.
Yep.
And that's the point of etiquette, really. It's trying to keep things appropriate and proper for the situation and the setting, not the campaign setting, but the physical setting we're in. And it's highly important because not everybody considers it. You know, we look at things such as eating. How do you feel about eating during games?
Okay, so it's a little all over the place because you have games that are like beer and nuts where it's like super casual. You can have snacks everywhere. I am only against snacks if they become a large distraction from the table. If your players are constantly walking away from the table to get snacks, that's a bad one. Mm-hmm. If they're sitting at the table and they have their snack and drink with them, totally reasonable and fine. Mm-hmm. As long as they're not making a huge mess. Because, some people eat things like Doritos or Cheetos and that can contaminate their own papers and stuff. That's their choice.
Yeah.
But please, it's a fun game. Let your players relax a little.
And see, my big thing is as long as space dictates what you can consume.
Oh, yes.
So be it. If
Please do not bring a Subway sandwich.
If you have a table large enough for a Subway sandwich, go ahead, bring two of them.
Sure.
Have 6 plates of food in front of you if you have the space. But if I need to roll out a battle mat or set down some terrain or whatnot, and I have to move 20 pounds of food from 4 to 5 different players, we're approaching a little much. Now there are some times where I'm okay with, somebody brings a 6-pound tub of Twizzlers, whatever that goes in the middle of the table. That's one tub. 6 pounds, not a big deal. It's one tub. Move it. A full plate of food doesn't bother me if you got the space. If you're in a small space and I got to move everything to do something, it's irritating, and I do not like it. I understand that games usually happen in free time after work, so on-the-go dinner, not a big deal. Most people have the mind to create a space for themselves and not encroach on other people's spaces, so I can handle that. But do not encroach on other people's space or have really stinky food.
Yep.
I'm okay.
I would also like to encourage healthier options. You'd be surprised what you can coax your players into eating when when you offer the food to them. This is something that I like to bring up, not because it's super important or that you have to do, but like if one of your friends makes it to a game and they have like massive coffees or a bunch of energy drinks, you can't tell them no. They're going to eat what they want, but always be cautious. You don't necessarily want players who just destroy their health in front of you. Just do it. I know. This is a point that's like not super important, but it matters because you don't need a player who gets super jittery. On the opposite, you don't need a player who's shit-faced drunk.
Okay, so here we go. This is, oh man. I instilled a 2-drink limit rule for alcohol at my games. And I did that because I had one game where we all got shit-faced, which is absolutely nothing got done, but it was absolutely hilarious. And I had one game where one player got absolutely shit-faced and spilled his drink all over everything multiple times in one night. I'm like, all right, this is unacceptable.
That's like, he's probably borderline blackout.
Well, the situation is he doesn't have an opportunity to drink at home, so when he can get together with friends, he can have a few drinks, and it's not a big deal. Every now and then he went overboard. It's okay. It's not horrible. 2-drink maximum now. I stick with that. It's a scenario. I don't mind alcohol at the game as long as everybody's of legal age who can drink. If somebody is underage, as long as they don't have any, we're okay. But in general, do not get shit-faced drunk. It's absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah.
People present.
Yeah, the alcohol one's super interesting. For me, it's actually like getting high too. There's a difference between getting, a little high before the game, because I've had people show up high. That's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. I mean, I hope you didn't drive here like that.
Same.
Or you had someone drive you here and it's fine. But if you're like absolutely fucked out of your mind high, you're being a problem because now I can't run the game with you.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, you're trying to interfere with what I'm doing. It's like, no, you are interfering with everyone else, and I have to put up with it, and I have to babysit you.
Yeah.
And I did not come here today to do that.
Right. And that's any kind of inebriation. I think getting baked is, I don't like the way it smells, so we go to the hygiene thing. It stinks.
Yeah.
But
it does stink, yeah.
I think when you're inebriated, generally you are not really in the game. You're not focused. You're a distraction, and it makes it hard to enjoy the game. It's difficult. Etiquette is such a broad spectrum that everybody has different levels of okayness and gauges to. So I think it's a weird scenario. I think the biggest thing when we look at etiquette is cross-table communication, because you can get so off topic.
Oh,
and
yep.
That is the one that bothers me.
Well, this is the off-the-topic podcast.
Most. Well, we're still on topic here. I mean, think about it. This is one of our longest episodes to date. We're still not done with it. We're going to push it for about another 10 minutes at most.
Yeah.
But the cross-table communication where it's off-topic, nonstop, nothing gets done in games.
Side conversation between two players.
Yeah, and if it's non-distracting, we're good.
Yeah.
If it's the entire table who is unfocused, it's not okay. I've had players leave. I've had players quit. I've had players talk about it. I've had it mentioned because I let it go on. I let it happen. And the reason I let it happen is because obviously if you're not invested in the game, I'm not going to sit here and batter you down to focus and pay attention.
All right, I need to seize this from you. I have the perfect example. Main campaign. If you two listen to this, it's about you. So these two players, especially one of them, had the tendency to, the second work came up, they would turn it into a 5 to 10 minute conversation. We would be doing anything in game. Role play, middle of session, end of session, beginning of session, when I'm doing the intro, so to speak, they would just tangent into work and they would just pretend like the world disappeared. I don't care if you have any issues. I don't care if this is your unwind time. You do not get to do that. So, reasonably, you go, well, I pointed out, and you stop. When I would do this, and I would do it politely, they would push back and fight. They would even treat me like I'm being disrespectful.
Oh, Jesus.
And it turned into the point where I would have to be hyper-aggressive and go, stop. We're playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have to do it like that. 8 months later, it gets brought up to me that I'm being too aggressive, which at first I'm like, wait, am I? And then it took me remembering that I was originally polite, and when I did it, because they're not bad people, they're just abrasive. Mm-hmm. So when they feel nervous, they get defensive, and that's where the pushback comes from.
Yeah.
And I go, I can go back to being nice about it, but the second you act abrasive again, I have to go back to this. And so they just accepted that I have to be like that to them. It's sad, but it's true. And you know what? It's under control, and it's no longer a problem.
That's good. That's good. One of my issues is after a certain period of time where they are so off topic, so off track, I will generally just sit back. Hey, you don't want to play? You want to hang out and call it D&D? Whatever. That's what you guys are doing.
I think that's a totally good approach.
I won't even participate. I won't participate in the conversations. I will just sit there. And when people are like, so what are we doing? I'm like, are you ready to play now?
Yeah, I'm
now
sorry.
that You've wasted 2 hours of my time, and we're going to call it in an hour. You're ready to go?
Yep.
Because this, fine. Now we're going to go.
And you'll be surprised. What's really nice is, I know that seems childish, but the fact is the other players there will see you sit back, and kind of like the teacher being sick of it, they will recognize that. They'll recognize, I don't get to play the game while they're doing this. The players will team up with the DM and go, stop. And then the players doing it will immediately recognize, oops, and then they kind of back down.
Yep.
I mean, they might get defensive, but they usually back down.
Right. So that's usually how I approach it.
Super solid method.
What I started doing is I will say, guys, game is at this time. You guys are more than welcome to come over before game if you want to, and we'll bullshit. I will allow X amount of time before game to bullshit, or if they can't make it before, I will allow 10 to 20 minutes from start to bullshit, catch up on nerd stuff, talk about what we liked during the week when we didn't see each other regularly, and then game time starts at game time. So we try to have a pre-game bullshit session.
That's
just
great.
So we can get out of our system.
I love that.
It's not bad. It's to the point where I felt, am I here to play D&D or am I just hosting a D&D themed party? You know?
That you're hosting the ice cream social.
Right.
It's D&D themed this time.
Right. And that's how it felt. And I know a lot of people deal with these problems, and I mentioned it earlier, you have to set a precedent. You know, etiquette, as wide of a broad stroke as it is, you have to set those general expectations. In fact, I don't recall ever hearing about a session 0 until within the last 2 years, and session 0s didn't exist when I started. You know, it was not a session 0. It was just, shut up, nerd. That's what it fucking is. Play. And when session 0s came, I'm like, some of this makes sense. I like it. My session 0s are pretty much come over, bullshit your character up, build things up, let's roll.
Yeah.
Now, though, I gotta talk about how things are actually going to go down. And it's upsetting to me, actually.
Yeah.
I gotta lay down those expectations.
You saw it during my session 0. I almost have like a checklist of like things I have to bring up. And this is, I do it to every session 0 game.
Yep.
It doesn't really happen at personal friend games for sure, but with all randoms, yeah, sadly you have to really lay that out, and it makes people upset too, because sometimes people feel like they're being attacked, but in reality, you're just trying to stop a problem from occurring.
Right, and we've talked about that, because I mentioned before, I'm like, man, he's got to lay down all these rules. Is he going to be super PC, or no, I learned that it's not about being super PC with you particularly. It's really just from stopping somebody else from essentially breaching the social contract in the game.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest etiquette rule, because we all have different things we like and don't like to see, really set the precedent is the easiest way to broadly say etiquette is by setting the precedent.
Absolutely.
Now, for the listeners, if there's anything that you do love or absolutely hate at your table, I want you guys to let us know. You can actually send a message to us directly in Spotify, or you can find us at the Facebook group at Epic Table Games. You could also send a message through the website at epictablegames.com.
Yeah, and if you send that, I will respond to you immediately. Actually, probably within that hour, just for you.
Don't set a precedent you cannot maintain. All right, guys. Look, I know this is a longer episode. I hope you stayed through it. Hope you enjoyed it. I do want to hear some of your responses if we can get them. Always check us out at epictablegames.com or at Facebook, Epic Table Games. Later.
Make way for the paladins. Make way for the paladins. Epic Table Games. Make way for the paladins. Make way for the paladins. Epic Table Games. Thank you for listening to the Epic Table Games audio show with the Paladins of Podcasts, Rob and Josh. Until next time, stay in touch on Facebook at Epic Table Games and online at epictablegames.com.